testing to see if this works.
Yep.
And if it does
Testing,
not work,
testing.
can you say
Okay.
something?
Yep, I'm saying something.
So Gary and I are here today, and we thought we'd talk a little bit about a really important subject, climate change. So by way of introduction, Gary, this has been one of your passions for years, right? Decades.
Well, I see it as by far the biggest issue we face. I
Mhm.
mean, everything else pales in comparison.
Mhm.
In 1,000 years, we'll have forgotten the name of Trump and all these other people, but we will still be very much dealing with climate change. Because, even if we did everything perfect, like let's say we stopped today, Friday, we stopped from burning all fossil fuels, a lot of this heat and these changes are locked in for probably centuries. So it's kind of scary stuff. So yeah, I kind of concluded that it has to be the issue that gets the most attention. So
So we talked a lot about climate change and the causes and the consequences. And maybe at the end, we'll talk a little bit about hopeful things that we can do or governments can do and so forth. But so tell me just briefly for anyone who's been living under a rock, what is causing climate change?
ever since basically the start of the Industrial Revolution, we've chosen to burn just enormous amounts of fossil fuels.
Mhm.
And the adverse side effect of that is we pollute the atmosphere with, gases that happen to make the Earth retain heat, just basically the greenhouse effect. So it's kind of over this couple of centuries, it's slowly built up. So you didn't necessarily see it happening year to year, nor did we even know about it in distant past. But now it's becoming a little bit more in our face as the impacts are starting to be felt by a lot more
Okay.
people.
So
So,
I want to go over the impacts, but a few of the things I would like to talk about are things that people will say, like, well, it's not necessarily man-made, it's just the cycles. Or, yeah, we'll address that one.
the best thing I ever saw to explain that is imagine a bathtub and you turn on the spigot, fairly good rate, water's coming in, you pull the plug, and the water's going out at about the same speed. That represents the massive natural forces taking place in the earth of heat coming in from the sun and basically being dissipated. And
Mhm.
the problem is that even though what we've done in some ways is smaller than volcanoes and things, it's the cumulative. It's like now we put another little drop of water, spigot of water going in, even a small amount. The fact that it was in relative balance before, it only takes a small amount for us to do to start having an impact as it goes up and we start, having all kinds of bad things happen. So yeah, there are a lot of things that heat the earth but it was kind of a system relatively imbalanced, but we're now throwing that out of whack, basically.
One of the things you mentioned to me was you don't like the term global warming
Well,
because
it's
it's
not me.
deceptive.
It's I think most people say climate change because global warming it can be confusing to people because it implies it warms everywhere, and it's way more nuanced than that. There are literally places where it'll get colder in the winter, different times. So it's really change and it's disruption is what it is.
Mhm.
It's like when the Earth gets warmer, the atmosphere holds more water just by basic physics, and then we're going to get heavier downfall of rain. It just changes all sorts of things, and it's incredibly complex. So it could mean some places will dry and some places will flood, and some places will do both. But
Mhm.
the problem is that we're not ready for those changes.
Mhm. So what, maybe you've talked about a few. What are the dire consequences we're facing?
The funny thing is, people always talk about, huge numbers of people living along the edges of continents or their cities. So it'll rise and cities will be inundated, and that will happen. And that's true. It's not like such a speed that you can't walk and get
Mhm.
a better place to live and all. What worries me is that the consequence to me, which is by far the worst of climate change, is not bad real estate purchases. It's the fact that it contributes toward a mass extinction event. by destroying environments and stuff. Some of these environments are very sensitive, and by just minor changes, you can literally wipe out whole ecosystems. And those don't come back quick. If you look at the fossil record, it takes roughly 10 million years for biodiversity to recover from a mass extinction event. That's forever for all practical purposes. Our species hasn't been around that long. So imagine you and I are living at a very pivotal point in history that we're contributing to climate change, and we know about it, and we know what we should be doing to not do that. So we have huge decisions to make that will affect generations way down the line. So
assuming, I mean, I know you feel that we're not doing what we need to do. Why aren't we? Why isn't the world getting together?
Well, I would say we allow our governments to be too run by corporate interests. I mean, look at the massive money, especially here in the US, that goes into our political system. And it's outrageous. It's why we don't have a lot of things. So we can't have nice things. And one of the consequences, especially see right now, is literally trying to go against the science and say it's fake news, it's a Chinese hoax, and we should drill baby drill, basically. And it's just the timing could not be worse. So
what is 100? How many countries? 160 some countries. How many?
I think 192. I don't know, something like that. Yeah.
How many countries are doing the right thing, and how many are not? What's the percentage?
I don't think there's any country that isn't doing less than they could be doing. Some are doing obviously horrible, but others are doing much better, much more conscious. But even their efforts are falling way short of what's necessary. So there are no real heroes you can point out in this, unfortunately.
So the $1 million or maybe $1 trillion question is, what do we do? What do we do? What do governments do? What is your idea?
I've kind of come to the realization that if we're gonna wait on our fellow citizens to become aware of this and make this a big issue to them, we're gonna wait far too long. I mean, there's too many people. They're just trying to put their groceries on the table. They come home, they turn on the baseball game. They need to relax from a hard day of work, and they just simply don't have the time in their life to be champions for climate change. And they're really they don't have a lot of influence over a lot of systems. And so what that means is those of us who do care about it and want to make a difference, we have to work closer together. Right now, the people who are activists for climate change are just going in 100 different directions at once. They're marching in the street, they're throwing paint on Mona Lisa or whatever. It's just all kinds of things of dubious value, frankly. And the problem is a couple of things. One, we can't just march in the streets. What we have to do is an economic boycott, because that's the kind of forces we're fighting. It's money and interest that we're fighting. So unless you affect them back where it hurts the most, their money, they're just not going to care. They're not going to make those changes. And so I think one of the things is we need to be united behind more of an economic boycott. And you've heard the expression, united we stand, divided we fall. That is so accurate. And there are millions of people who care about climate change. So there is a reasonably large momentum there, but it's splintered, and it has to somehow get more united to make a difference. We don't need to convince a majority of the public of what laws need to be changed and stuff for power generation. We just need enough momentum to get the changes through. It doesn't, not everything has to be through only voting. Activism is a legitimate activity within democracy.
So you mentioned, throwing paint on the Mona Lisa, and I was thinking, and you're talking about the split in the climate change movement, and a couple, one we've talked a lot about are the people who glue their hands to the road or, destroy things. And I think both agree that doesn't really help. It just makes people point and say, they're crazy. But the other one.
Hey, by the way, they're not crazy. I respect their passion. I have a lot of people on Facebook I've befriended who are in like Extinction Rebellion and stuff. And these are people who genuinely care. It's just
Yeah,
that,
just to be clear, I'm not saying they're crazy. It's that
yeah.
people on the other side can say, "Oh, look, they're."
Well, we have to be effective, is the thing.
You
And
have to
I'm
be what?
just
I'm sorry.
not convinced good motivations or being sincere is not enough. We have to also be strategic about it. And I just don't feel like we are at this point. And I
The
think we
other.
could, even though there are movements
Mhm.
toward, away from fossil fuels, it could be more, it could be faster if activism was more united, basically.
So I'll throw out one for you that may, I don't know if you want to answer this, but that seems to divide a lot of environmentalists and so forth, is nuclear power.
How you do it is not as important as that we do it. I happen to think myself that we're probably going to need nuclear power. I know it's the issue with it right now is the cost, but as far as I can see, the science and everything else about it's going to be plenty safe, and it's 24/7. There's just so many advantages that I don't think we can rule that out. So the fact that there are companies working on small modular reactors, as long as they're allowed to do that and they keep moving forward, I think that's good. That doesn't mean we can't also achieve a lot of that gain with, solar and wind and others. But the problem is that when you look at the greater graph of how much of our energy in the world is created by fossil fuels versus renewables slash nuclear, it's still fossil fuels are way ahead. So we have just an enormous long ways to catch up.
Mm-hmm.
So the point being, I can't predict if nuclear will be the right way to go, but I would say at this point we can't afford to rule out options.
Okay. So before we go here, you have come up with a site called, was it Carbon Holiday?
Yeah, that's my attempt at what would that economic boycott look like.
Mm-hmm.
You have to come up with something that engages people and it scales. There's a lot of aspects of a proper economic boycott that have to be there. And I made my attempt at such an effort called carbonholiday.org. So, I mean, you can look at that. But
And understanding it's like was it one day a month or something? People.
yeah, it's basically the sit out approach. Like if you and I stay home one day a month, not to buy any Amazon, no gas, no nothing, you don't have to sit in the dark, but you just drastically reduce your consumption. If everybody does that in the same day, that's not going to fix the world, but it's going to catch their attention. And the more people do that, the more it's going to catch their attention. And the key is it can't just be one day a month. I have it set so that once you have maybe, I can't remember, is it 1 million people who've signed up to participate, then it will jump to 2 days a month, the first 2 days of the month. So, it's a way for a protest movement, an economic boycott to function and to scale, basically.
Great. So I think I'd really enjoy seeing comments from people on what they think we can do. Any ideas you all have? I know you're in a lot of groups dealing with this and talking it over with people all over the world, right?
Yep. One thing I can say absolutely is it's the most important issue.
Yeah.
By far.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Well, thanks for watching. I'll
Okay.
talk to you later.